Well, Mike, we go from one horrific case to another. Now we're moving on to Wisconsin. This is where a man has been sentenced to 205 years in prison for murdering 5 members of his family. According to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Christopher Stokes, who's 44 years old, has pleaded guilty to 5 counts of intentional homicide. Now, more than a year ago, on April 27th of 2020, Christopher himself called 911 and told the dispatchers that he had killed his whole family. He said, quote, I just massacred my whole family. And he went on to say, the gun is still upstairs with the bodies. To me, this is incredibly interesting. Then there's, so the police arrive at the house and they see Christopher Stokes outside with a toddler. So police think that he's a surviving victim of the massacre because it's, an adult with a baby, a toddler. So that's how they approach him to, are you okay? Is the gunman still inside? Here's the amazing thing. He is the shooter. So can you imagine for those few seconds where police actually, treated him as a victim and then realized, oh dear Lord, he is indeed the shooter. It's stunning because the officers actually asked him, did you hear any of the shots? And he said, yeah, I didn't hear them. I did them.
Yeah.
Those are the quotes. Okay. So let's get into who was in the house and who was murdered. And then we're going to get into what happened in court because this goes to justice, right? And what is justice and whether the survivors of those who were killed feel that they were just, and they're all related. That's the other thing. Everyone's related here. So let's get into the victims here. So he murdered his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Teresa Thomas, who's 41. They shared a son, Demetrius Thomas, 15, and Teresa's daughter, Tira Agee, who was 16. 2 others were also killed. Lathika Stokes, 17 years old, and Marcus Stokes, 18 years old. They were identified as his niece and his nephew. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reports that Christopher spared his 3-year-old grandchild because the grandson reportedly asked him not to hurt him. So he spared the baby. The baby was there, witnessed everything. At 3, you are aware of what's going on, especially if you can say, please don't hurt me.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the trauma that this child has suffered and how this child will be permanently affected by all this, besides the fact that his family was just massacred in front of his eyes. So, he admitted again in the 911 call to police who arrived. He did a plea deal. He's never denied it. He's always owned it from the very beginning. Yes, I did this. But what has been missing from this is the why. Why did you do this? So I want to play a clip from sentencing because he has a chance to address the court and he describes and offers an apology, but really doesn't offer any answers. Here's a clip.
I deserve everything I get. I'm not asking for no leniency or anything like that. I woke up and I just had blood on my mind. I can't see it no other way.
So when I hear him say things like, I don't know what in the world came over me, woke up and just had blood on my mind. Who says things like that, Mike?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
But crazy is not the issue because clearly the court and his defense attorney wanted to make sure that when he entered into this plea deal, because he kept saying, yes, I did it. It's like, wait a minute. What is his mental capacity to make these decisions and enter into a plea deal? And they determined, no, he is mentally fit.
Did he have any criminal history, any history of violence? Okay.
Plenty of it.
Okay.
Yes. And we're going to get into that. He
Okay.
had a criminal history. And we're also going to get into the fact that that his attorney says he had asked for mental health services because he was starting to hear voices. And this was at the beginning of COVID, started to get help. Then, because of COVID, the help became either telephonic or on video and virtual.
Or maybe
no
even
longer
unavailable. I mean, because I know from the work that I do that a lot of the kids that I represent who don't have a lot of resources were put on lines for treatment. We're not getting any mental health treatment at all, and during a time when they needed it most.
Right.
So that might be his situation, is that he may be completely of sound mind now on proper medication, but we don't know what the situation was like for him leading up to and at the beginning of the pandemic, because this happens in April of 2020. So it's about 6 weeks into this radical change in all of our lives, and different people reacted differently. Again, not an excuse, but interesting timing of when this happened.
Yes. Yes. And I do appreciate when someone owns up to what they've done, as opposed to I didn't do it. I didn't do it. That really turns my stomach.
It is so interesting because obviously he commits such a horrific and unforgivable crime, but you have to have this small crumb of respect for him for coming forward and immediately admitting it was him, because time after time after time, we see people who have committed unspeakable crimes who then put either their family or a victim's family through the torture of a trial in which they are fabricating a defense and insisting that they're innocent. And while he doesn't give answers as to why he did this, at least he has that small amount of dignity to admit that he did it.
It's so interesting that you say that, because even with his admission and sparing the extended family a trial where he denies everything, it did not relieve their pain. It may have shortened the experience of the trial, but clearly from what we saw, because the family members get a right to address the court, and his sister is yelling at him.
Yeah.
Say something. She just wants to hear from him. She needs an answer. Then you hear another family member who's sitting, with the rest of the public, and she starts screaming at him, and she has to be removed from the courthouse. A sister of his afterwards is interviewed and says, I hate him.
Yeah.
I hate him. Do I love him because he's my brother? Yes. He is my brother, but I hate him for what he's done, what he has done to this family. So here you have the extended family suffering so tremendously because of the carnage, the number of people who have been killed, and the person who took all your loved ones away is another loved one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he didn't spare them. I mean, I know what you're saying. Yes, they didn't have to sit through a long trial and his denials. I get that. But it's amazing how... Well, I guess it's not amazing. The pain is still the same. And I always say it goes back to justice. What is justice? Here the man gets 200 years in prison. The man admits to doing it, right? But yet no one feels any justice.
Yeah, because there can't be justice in this sort of a profound loss. I don't know that there was an answer he could give them that would have given them any solace or peace. Because at the end of the day, it's a bloodbath. I mean, it's a person who clearly some switch flipped, and he, as he says, had blood on his mind and just loses it because it doesn't feel like it's for revenge. It's not targeting the girlfriend and maybe her daughter or her kids because he's angry at her. He kills his own niece and nephew. Like there just doesn't feel like there's any rhyme or reason to what he's done other than somehow some switch turned onto red and he just
lost it,
followed some internal order to kill everyone in the house.
and he said it. These are his words: "I did the ultimate sin. I deserve to be locked up. I deserve everything I get. I'm not asking for no leniency or anything like that. I deserve it. No one in the world should have done what I did."
Yeah.
But yet hearing those words, it's like it almost infuriates you more because you're hearing someone who clearly knows right from wrong.
Well, yeah, and it's like that repeated word that his own family members are using, which is why. It just becomes, you just repeat it in your head, and the family will so sadly be torturing themselves with that question for the rest of their lives, is really why. Why would anyone do this?
Yeah. And the judge, Michelle Havas, sentenced Christopher to 40 years for each victim, plus another 5 years for the illegal possession of a gun because he was a convicted felon. So that's how they came up with 205 years. And as I said, they tried to determine before sentencing, was there any mental illness, any defect, or anything like that that could have played a role in this or made it impossible for him to enter this plea deal. But after 2 doctors' evaluations, they found that Christopher was fit to stand trial and could make these decisions. You asked about...
Well, I do want to speak to that for one moment, because there are 2 separate things that have to do with mental illness or fitness in a criminal defense case. One is, was the person of sound mind when they committed the offense? And are they of sound mind now to go through the criminal proceedings? It seems that whatever mental health issues he was having, he was not so degraded as to not understand the difference between right and wrong. But if it's true that he was hearing voices and seeking some kind of help, there still might have been an underlying mental health condition. Separate from that, you need to look at his condition during the criminal process. If an individual perhaps was sane when they committed a crime, but by the time that they're going through the process, they have deteriorated to such an extent that they don't understand the proceedings and are unable to assist in their defense, can't communicate with their lawyer, then they are not fit to stand trial, and they are generally sent to a mental health facility until their sanity is restored, and then they come back. In this case, because for him to enter a plea, for them to resolve the case, they need to make sure that he is mentally fit and able to make those types of decisions, to understand his defenses, to understand his constitutional rights, and to understand the consequences of his plea. And he clearly was mentally fit now. That doesn't necessarily speak to what exactly his mental health was at the time that he committed the offense, other than that he was probably able to determine between right and wrong, which is the foundational question for someone to be sane for purposes of criminal prosecution.
I think so. His attorney said that in March of 2020, which would have been a month before the massacre, that he started to receive some mental health support. And his defense attorney says that Christopher allegedly was hearing voices and that he was in counseling sessions, but they were canceled in favor of phone-only communication due to the COVID restrictions. And as you said, that could very well have, that little lifeline. Yeah. That little lifeline could have maybe averted this. I don't know. It's hard to say. But clearly there was something going on. And you asked about his criminal history. And in 2002, he was convicted of a misdemeanor battery and sentenced to probation and ordered to attend domestic abuse counseling. And he was prohibited from having firearms. Then, fast forward 5 years later, to 2007, he pleaded guilty to felony battery this time. So he went from a misdemeanor to felony, and bail jumping and intimidation of a witness. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Again, no firearms. Then in 2012, he pleaded guilty to another misdemeanor battery with domestic abuse modifier. And that was another 18 months behind prison. And then in 2017, we have him pleading guilty again to another misdemeanor, this one disorderly conduct, with a month in jail. So this is a guy since 2002 who's been in and out of prison.
Yeah. And also the domestic violence part of it speaks volumes to me, because I consider this last horrific case to be domestic violence.
Yes.
He's killing his on and off again girlfriend, and he's killing his own children, and he's killing relatives. That's domestic violence. And there's a real strong history of domestic violence, because I would hazard a guess that the felony battery is a domestic violence case, because often when a felony battery is connected to an intimidation of a witness, the witness being intimidated is a family member. And in this, because that's who you have access to. So often when you see those two crimes together, it's because it's domestic violence. And the reason why it might not have had a domestic violence modifier is because somebody is sentenced to probation and counseling and all of those bells and whistles when they get probation. If someone goes to state prison, all the judge does is transfer them to state prison and makes no other orders. So they might not put that domestic violence modifier on there, because he's not getting those programs. But I would bet that the 2008 case, did you say? The
2007.
Felony? Yeah, the
2007 felony, yes.
Yeah, I would bet that that is a domestic violence case for sure.
Yeah, that's the one with the intimidation of a witness.
Yeah, because he's probably intimidating either a girlfriend, perhaps the same victim who he ended up killing. And that says a lot about what maybe led to this, that he has these underlying issues with violence, and perhaps violence against women. And that then explodes into this horrible event, because I think 3 of the victims here were women.
Mm-hmm. A very sad case, a case in which he will be in prison for the rest of his life. He apologized, he owned up to it, and the conclusion is the same. A horrific tragedy.
Yeah.